She had exactly 4 seconds to memorize a stranger's face at an airport 3 years ago. She never imagined he'd spend 3 years and an empire's worth of resources tracking her down just to kidnap her back. If you believe love should never come with a locked gate, a countdown clock, or a man who thinks kidnapping counts as courtship, hit subscribe right now. Like this, if you're rooting for Amara over every syndicate boss who's ever mistaken control for love. Only the Choi Syndicate's supporters would scroll past without smashing that button. Amara Johnson had a rule about vacations. No crying, no drama, and absolutely no falling for anyone who didn't have a return address in the same time zone as her student loans. Seoul, so far, had been perfectly compliant. 2 weeks of palace tours, karaoke rooms that made her sound better than she had any right to, and enough spicy tteokbokki to file a formal complaint against her own stomach. She noticed the black sedan on day 3. Sleek, tinted, parked outside her hotel like it was posing for a car commercial. She told herself Seoul just had a thing for expensive cars. This was, after all, a city where luxury brands seemed to breed like rabbits. By day 12, the sedan was still there. Same spot, same smug shine, and Amara's internal alarm, the one that had kept her alive through 2 toxic exes and one truly cursed group project in grad school, started ringing. She should have listened to it sooner. Kang Min-jae did not believe in coincidences. He believed in leverage, timing, and the particular kind of patience that made grown men in expensive suits sweat through their tailoring. On paper, he was the reclusive chairman of the Kang Luxury Group, the kind of CEO who showed up in 3-page magazine profiles that always ended with some variation of notoriously private. Off paper, in the parts of Seoul that didn't show up on tourist maps, his name did something more useful than sell handbags. It ended arguments before they started. He had built an empire on one gift, seeing the next move before his enemies made it. Rivals called it a curse. Min-jae called it Tuesday. He had outthought cartels, outweighted corrupt prosecutors, and quietly dismantled a coup organized by men who used to call his father Sir. Not once, in 15 years of this, had he lost control of a room. He'd lost control of exactly one memory. 3 years ago, in an airport terminal that smelled like burnt coffee and bad decisions, a stranger's eyes had met his for 4 seconds before she vanished through a departure gate. 4 seconds. He had war rooms with less real estate in his brain than those 4 seconds occupied. His men called it the ghost file, the one unsolved variable in a man who solved everything. Then Seoul's surveillance network, which Min-jae funded more generously than most small countries fund their militaries, flagged a woman ordering extra spicy tteokbokki near Insadong with a laugh that made 3 separate security cameras earn their salary. Confirm it, Min-jae said, not looking up from his tablet, voice as flat as a man ordering dry cleaning. They confirmed it. 4 seconds became 4 years of certainty in about 4 minutes. Amara found out how thorough that certainty was on the day of her flight home. She was 3 feet from her gate, boarding pass in hand, one hand already composing the group chat message that would read, "Seoul was amazing, see y'all Thursday," when 4 men in suits far too well tailored for anything legal closed around her with the quiet efficiency of people who had rehearsed this. There was no chase. There was barely a struggle. Just a hand at her elbow, a low voice saying something in Korean that sounded infuriatingly almost polite, and then nothing. She woke up somewhere that looked less like a crime scene and more like a 5-star apology. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed mist rolling over pine ridges like the mountain itself was trying to seem trustworthy. The room smelled like cedar and money. Somewhere close, water moved over stone with the kind of serenity that felt, honestly, insulting given the circumstances. Amara sat up so fast her head spun, grabbed the nearest object, a ceramic vase that probably cost more than her rent, and turned toward the door just as it opened. The man who walked in looked exactly like his magazine photos, except magazines had never captured the specific stillness of someone who had never once, in his adult life, worried about being interrupted. "You're not going to need that," he said, glancing at the vase like it was an amusing houseplant, "though I respect the initiative." "Who?" Amara said, voice shaking with something that was 70% fear and 30% pure, unfiltered fury. "The actual hell are you?" "Kang Min-jae?" He said it the way other men said their blood type. Factual, unbothered. "And you, Amara Johnson, are going to be my guest for the next 365 days. She stared at him. Somewhere outside, a bird sang like it hadn't just witnessed the beginning of a hostage situation. Guest? She repeated. That's a bold word for kidnapping. Min-jae almost smiled. Almost. I was hoping you'd say that. The estate, Amara decided within her first 24 hours, was less a house and more a very tasteful cage, the kind of place interior designers would call serene mountain retreat and hostage negotiators would call extremely well-funded crime scene. There were no bars on the windows. There didn't need to be. The nearest road was 40 minutes down a mountain patrolled by men who moved like they'd been raised on discipline instead of breakfast cereal. The nearest town was a helicopter ride away, and the man who owned all of it walked through his own home like gravity worked differently for him, like doors opened out of respect rather than mechanics. You can't keep me here, Amara told him over a breakfast she hadn't asked for, hadn't touched, and fully intended to weaponize if given the chance. This is Korea. There are laws. There's an embassy, Min-jae. There is. He didn't look up from his tablet, scrolling through what she assumed was either stock reports or a hit list, possibly both. I found embassies respond faster to money than to phone calls. I have significantly more of one than you have of the other. That's not a comeback. That's a confession. It's an observation. He finally looked at her, and there was something almost amused in it, which made her want to throw the very expensive teapot at his very expensive head. You're welcome to test the theory. I'd advise against it. She tested it anyway, obviously. The first attempt happened on day 9, when Amara discovered that the East Wing service corridor was guarded by exactly one man who left his post every 90 minutes for what she assumed was a bathroom break, but hoped was a smoke break, because smoke breaks took longer. She made it out a side door, across a gravel path that crunched louder than a marching band, and directly into the arms of a security guard named Wu Jin, who looked more disappointed in her than angry. Ma'am, he said in careful English, please, my knees. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to know what running after an American tourist did to a grown man's knees on a nightly basis. The second attempt, day 19, involved a laundry cart and an ambition Amara was almost proud of. She got as far as the kitchen loading dock before a woman named Hana, who Amara had genuinely believed liked her, who had complimented her skincare routine, gently steered the cart back inside with the serene patience of someone redirecting a toddler. You're doing so well, Hana said, in a tone that suggested Amara was, in fact, doing terribly. By day 30, Min-jae had stopped even pretending to be surprised at breakfast. Cart today, he said, not a question. How did you? Hana texts me. He said this the way other men might say, the sun rises in the east, an immutable fact of the universe, mildly inconvenient to argue with. Everyone here reports to me, Amara. That's rather the point of an empire. Cute. Real cute. You know what else is the point of an empire? Overthrowing it. She jabbed her chopsticks at him like a tiny, useless sword. Ever think about that? Ever wonder if one of these days your own people get tired of playing prison guard for your imaginary girlfriend? Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. I think about it every day, he said, quieter than she expected. It's why there are 3 men outside this room instead of 1. That should have scared her more than it did. Instead, it planted something else. A question she wasn't ready to hold yet, about a man who lived so surrounded by potential betrayal that peace looked, to him, like paranoia with good manners. She didn't get her answer that day. She got, instead, a mountain road ambush 2 weeks later that left 3 of Min-jae's men bleeding in the gravel and Amara screaming his name for the first time, not in fury, but in the kind of raw fear that comes from watching a plan you didn't ask for nearly get people killed on your behalf. Somewhere in that scream, something between them shifted. Neither of them would admit it yet, but the gilded cage had just started keeping its receipts. By month 6, Amara had learned 3 things about mountain estates. The guards rotated on predictable schedules, the security cameras had a blind spot near the eastern greenhouse, and kindness, deployed strategically, worked better on lonely old men than any amount of yelling ever had. His name was Grandfather Sook, though nobody called him that to his face except Amara, who decided somewhere around month 4 that a 70-year-old groundskeeper who tended Min-jae's roses like they were grandchildren deserved better than being called the help. She brought him coffee. She asked about his knees, his garden, his late wife's kimchi recipe, which he described with the kind of reverence usually reserved for scripture. She meant every word of it. That was the part that would haunt her later, that the kindness had been real, even if what she'd built on top of it wasn't. The Eastern Gate, he told her one gray morning, voice low, opens at 2 a.m. for deliveries. Guard rotation gap, 12 minutes. She should have asked why a groundskeeper knew guard rotations down to the minute. She was too busy packing. At 2 a.m., Amara moved through the mist like she'd rehearsed it, because she had 40 times in her head, in the dark. In the version of this story where she got to be the hero of her own escape, instead of a woman a mafia boss had decided to collect like art. She made it past the tree line. She made it to the tall grass beyond it. She made it exactly as far as the engineered plan needed her to. Headlights hit her like judgment. Not Min-jae's men. Different suits, different insignia, different energy entirely. The specific menace of men who didn't answer to anyone she'd met yet. The Choice Syndicate, though she wouldn't learn that name until later, materialized out of the dark like they'd been waiting. Because they had. "Get in the car," one of them said in English, which was somehow worse. The personal touch of being kidnapped in a language she actually understood. Amara had time to think. With startling clarity, I traded one cage for a much worse one before the night exploded. Min-jae arrived like weather. Not dramatic, efficient, terrifying, and how little wasted motion there was in it. Later, she'd remember fragments, the sound gunfire made when it wasn't in a movie, the way Min-jae moved a body out of his path, like he was clearing furniture, the specific stillness in his face that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with control, held together by sheer will. 3 of his men went down. None of Min-jae's expression changed until the last Choi soldier hit the ground and didn't get up. And then, for one unguarded second, she saw something that looked almost like fear. Not of the men, of what almost happened to her. "You could have died," he said, voice raw in a way she'd never heard from him, gripping her shoulders like he needed proof she was solid. "Do you understand that? Not from me. From them. From a world you didn't choose and can't see the edges of. I didn't ask to be part of your world," she snapped back, shaking, furious at him and at herself, and at whatever twist of fate had made Grandfather Suck's kind eyes into a weapon aimed at her. "No," Min-jae said, "but you are. That gate wasn't an accident, Amara. Someone inside my own house gave them the timing." His jaw tightened. "Someone I trusted." She didn't sleep that night, not from fear of him, from the slow, sickening realization that the version of Min-jae she'd built in her head, the villain who kept her for sport, didn't match the man who just bled to keep her breathing. The cage was real. But so, apparently, was the wall he'd been standing between her and something so much worse she hadn't even known to be afraid of it. In the weeks after, the mansion softened in ways she didn't expect. Min-jae showed her mornings without an entourage, just him, tea, and a silence that felt less like control and more like exhaustion finally allowed to exist in daylight. He told her about his mother's memorial rites, performed every year regardless of which rival war was currently threatening to swallow him whole. He didn't ask her to understand him. He just kept, quietly, showing up as someone worth understanding. She still called the estate Alcatraz with a skincare routine, but she said it now like an inside joke instead of an accusation. Grandfather Sook disappeared 4 days after the ambush. Not fired, not reassigned, just gone. His cottage stripped bare, his roses left half pruned like a sentence cut mid-thought. Amara found out from Hana, who delivered the news with the same gentle, unreadable calm she used for everything, which somehow made it worse. "Where did he go?" Amara asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be comforting. "Chairman Min-jae will explain," Hannah said, which was Hana's way of saying absolutely not my problem. "Good luck." Min-jae explained that night over a dinner neither of them touched. "Suck wasn't tending roses for me," he said, each word measured like he was diffusing something. "He was reporting your movements to Choi Dae-hyun for the last 8 months. The Eastern Gate, the guard rotation, none of that was luck. It was bait. Choi didn't want you back, Amara. He wanted to know if I'd bleed for you. Now he knows." Amara sat with that for a long, ugly moment. The specific nausea of realizing the one kindness she'd trusted in this gilded prison had been a loaded gun the whole time. So the coffee, the stories about his wife's kimchi, all of it might have been real, Min-jae said quietly. People can be genuinely kind and still be bought. That's the part nobody warns you about. It should have made her trust him less. Instead, infuriatingly, it made her trust him more because he hadn't hidden it, hadn't softened it into something easier to swallow. He'd just handed her the truth, ugly edges and all, the way he seemed to hand her everything now. The months that followed felt like a truce neither of them signed, but both kept honoring. Min-jae showed her the estate's memorial hall, where his mother's photograph sat between fresh flowers replaced daily by his own hand, no staff involved. She used to tell me power was just fear wearing better shoes, he said. And Amara laughed, really laughed, the kind that surprised her, because it was, annoyingly, the funniest true thing she'd heard in months. So what does that make you? Fear in a $5,000 suit? 4,000? He corrected. I'm not made of money. You're extremely made of money. I'm made of tasteful money. There's a difference. She started noticing things she hadn't let herself notice before. The way he read reports at 5 a.m. because sleep felt, to him, like a luxury other people got to afford. The way his jaw tightened every time his phone buzzed, bracing for the next war before it arrived. The way he never once, in 8 months, asked her to say she cared about him. He just kept showing up, patient as weather, like he'd already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for her to catch up. You know this is still kidnapping, she told him one morning, mostly to remind herself. I know, he said. I've made my peace with being the villain in this story. I'd rather be the villain who keeps you alive than the hero who couldn't. She didn't have a comeback for that. For the first time since the airport she never remembered. Since the black sedan. Since the 4 men in suits. Amara didn't reach for one. But peace, in Min-jae's world, was never permanent. It was a held breath between wars. And 3 days after that conversation, his phone rang at 3 a.m. with a name that made his whole body go still in a way Amara had only seen once before, the night of the ambush. What happened? She asked, already dreading the answer. Min-jae's face, for the first time since she'd met him, showed something closer to fear than control. They took my sister. Min-jae's sister was 22, studying art history in a program he'd fought his own board to keep her enrolled in, 3,000 miles from anything resembling the family business. Yoon, he didn't know her brother's real empire the way most people didn't know the wiring behind their walls. She knew the lights worked, knew he paid for everything, knew he showed up to her exhibitions in suits that made her classmates whisper. She had never once, in 22 years, been allowed to know why he insisted on 2 bodyguards she thought were just dad's paranoia. She was gone from her studio apartment in Boston by the time anyone realized the guards had been drugged instead of dismissed. Amara watched Min-jae take the call. Watched the exact moment a man who had never once lost control of a room lose it entirely. Not loudly, not with shouting, but with a stillness so complete it was somehow louder than screaming. He set the phone down like it had turned to glass in his hand. They didn't want you, he said, voice flat with the particular horror of a man realizing he'd solved the wrong equation. The ambush at the gate, Sook's betrayal. It was never about taking you, Amara. It was reconnaissance. Choi needed to know if I'd burned the empire down for someone I hadn't even known a year. He got his answer that night on the mountain road. Now he's collecting on it. So he took the one person you'd actually burned the world for, Amara said slowly, the shape of it settling into her stomach like a stone. Because I already proved it, and she's real leverage. I'm just... She stopped, hearing her own voice crack in a way she hated. You're not just anything, Min-jae said, sharper than she'd ever heard him, gripping her hand like an anchor he hadn't planned on needing. But yes, Uni is blood. Choi knows blood buys more silence from my board than a stranger ever could. The word stranger landed wrong between them, and they both heard it. There was no time to sit in the wound of it. Within the hour, Min-jae's estate transformed into a war room. Men Amara had only seen carrying tea trays now carrying rifles. Maps of Boston's financial districts spread across a dining table that had, days earlier, hosted an argument about whether kimchi belonged in fried rice. Amara sat in the corner, useless in every practical sense, furious about being useless, and watched Min-jae become someone she hadn't fully met yet. Not the quiet man with the memorial hall, not the sardonic billionaire who negotiated suit prices with himself. This was the boss the streets whispered about. Ice where there used to be patience. There's a mole, his second-in-command said, voice careful. Someone confirmed Yuni's schedule. Someone close. The room went silent in a way that meant everyone was doing the math on who among them it could be. Find them, Min-jae said, quietly. I want to know who sold my sister before I decide who to kill for it. Amara flinched at the casualness of it. Not because it was cruelty, she realized, but because it wasn't. It was math. Grief. Filtered through a man who'd spent his whole life being told that softness was a liability he couldn't afford. Later, alone in the hallway outside the war room, she found him standing with both palms flat against a window, mist rolling over the pines like nothing in the world was ending. I told you once I'd never force you to feel anything, he said, without turning around. I meant it. But I need you to understand, if this goes the way I think it will, the man who orchestrated this isn't finished. He wanted proof I loved someone enough to destroy myself for them. Now he has two names instead of one. Amara stepped closer, surprising herself with how easily her hand found his shoulder. Then let's make sure he doesn't get to use either of them. Min-jae turned, and for the first time since the airport terminal 3 years and one entire kidnapping ago, he looked at her like a man who'd stopped waiting for an answer and started fighting for one instead. The mole was Deputy Director Han, 12 years in Min-jae's organization, a man who'd carried Min-jae's father's coffin at the funeral, who'd taught a 9-year-old Min-jae how to tie a proper tie the week his mother died. Finding that out cost Min-jae something Amara watched him try and fail to hide. Gambling debts. His second-in-command reported, voice careful in the way people get around grief wearing a business suit. Choi's men found him 3 years ago, buried in markers he couldn't pay. They didn't need to threaten him. They just needed to be patient. Everyone has a price, Min-jae said quietly. I used to think mine was knowing that. Turns out the real lesson was never trusting the ones close enough to know yours. Han didn't run when they found him. He sat in the study where he'd once taught a grieving boy to tie a Windsor knot, and he told them everything. Uni's schedule, the drugged bodyguards, the safe house on the outskirts of Boston where Cho Dae-yeon was keeping her until Min-jae did something stupid enough to be worth watching. Han asked for exactly one thing before Min-jae's men took him away. That Min-jae tell Uni someday that he was sorry. I'll tell her the truth, Min-jae said, which wasn't a promise, and Han seemed to understand that was the only kind of mercy left available to him. 26 hours later, Min-jae's private jet touched down outside Boston with a small, precise team, and one furious, uninvited passenger Min-jae had tried and failed to leave behind. You are not coming into a hostage extraction, he'd said at the estate, in the tone of a man used to being obeyed. You kidnapped me for 365 days, Amara had replied, already zipping her jacket. I have earned the right to watch you fix your own mess. He hadn't argued further. That, more than anything, told her how much had shifted between them. A man who once controlled every variable in a room, now choosing to let one variable choose herself. The safe house sat behind a boatyard on the edge of the harbor, unremarkable in the way dangerous places tried to be. Min-jae's plan was surgical. Cut power, breach quiet, extract Uni before Choi's men realized their leverage was walking out the back door. It worked exactly as long as plans involving furious 22-year-old art history students tend to work, which is to say, right up until Uni, finding herself finally within reach of freedom, kneed the nearest guard hard enough to trigger every alarm in the building. She's your sister, Amara said later, breathless, ducking behind a stack of shipping containers as gunfire cracked somewhere too close for comfort. Explains a lot. She gets it from our mother, Min-jae said, and even mid-firefight, there was something almost like pride in it. Cho Dae-hyun himself emerged from the chaos like a man who'd been rehearsing this moment for months. Mid-50s, unbothered, the specific calm of someone who believed he'd already won, regardless of tonight's outcome. Kang Min-jae, he said, like greeting an old classmate. You brought the girl. Both of them. Sentimental of you. You wanted proof I'd burn everything down, Min-jae said, stepping forward, voice ablade with no hesitation left in it. Here I am, ash and all. I wanted proof you were weak, Choi corrected. Congratulations, you've delivered spectacularly. The shot came fast, aimed at Min-jae, close enough that Amara didn't have time to think, only to move, throwing herself into the space between them with a speed she'd later swear had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with refusing to lose someone twice. The bullet caught her shoulder instead of his chest. She went down hard, and the last thing she registered before the world tunneled was Min-jae's voice screaming her name in a way that had nothing left of the calm, controlled man the streets whispered about. Just a man, terrified, finally out of moves to plan his way around. The shoulder wound wasn't fatal. The surgeon in Boston said as much within the hour, in the clipped, relieved tone of a man who'd clearly been paid enough to work fast and ask no questions. But for the length of time between Amara hitting the ground and that sentence being spoken, Kang Min-jae experienced something his entire empire had never managed to teach him: the specific, useless terror of a man with unlimited resources and no way to buy back a single second. He didn't leave her side. Not for Choi Dae-hyun, cuffed and snarling somewhere behind them, done in by his own overconfidence and a furious art history student who'd apparently inherited her brother's tactical instincts along with his stubbornness. Not for the board members already calling about optics. Not for anything. You threw yourself in front of a bullet, he said, once she was stable enough to glare at him properly, for a man who kidnapped you. I threw myself in front of a bullet, Amara corrected, wincing as she shifted against the hospital pillows. For an idiot who apparently thinks dying nobly is a personality trait, someone had to stop you. Yoonhee, perched at the foot of the bed with the fierce, wet-eyed gratitude of someone who'd just watched her brother's whole, carefully constructed world crack open, laughed despite herself. I like her, she told Min-jae, like it was a verdict. Don't lose her. I'm working on it, Min-jae said. And for the first time in the entire 360-some days since an airport terminal became a kidnapping, he sounded genuinely unsure of the outcome. Choi Dae-hyun's arrest didn't end the war so much as amputate its head. Min-jae spent the following weeks doing the quiet, exhausting work of empire triage, reassuring a board that liked profits more than principles, replacing the loyalty Han's betrayal had hollowed out, burying a mole who'd once tied his tie with more grace than his crime deserved. Amara watched him do it from a hospital bed and then a recovery chair, and then, eventually, standing at his side again, watched the machinery of his world grind back toward order, and understood finally that the calm she'd once mistaken for coldness was just a man perpetually rebuilding the walls that kept the people he loved alive. Day 365 arrived on a morning identical to the one that had started this. Mist over the pines, tea going cold, because neither of them could think of anything to say that mattered as much as the silence did. The gates are open, Min-jae said. He'd told the guards himself. No cars trailing her to the airport this time. No men in suits. No leverage disguised as hospitality. You can leave whenever you want. I meant that the day I took you, and I mean it more now. Amara looked past him, toward the tree line she'd once tried to disappear into 3 separate times. Past the guard post where Woo Jin still nursed some private grudge about his knees. Past the greenhouse where a good man's kindness had once been weaponized against her. You know what's funny? She said. I spent the first 6 months planning every possible way out of here. Card escapes, bribing groundskeepers, all of it. She shook her head, almost laughing at the woman she'd been. And now the door's actually open, and I don't want it. Amara, I'm not choosing you because you kidnapped me into it, she said, cutting him off before he could talk himself into an argument neither of them needed. I'm choosing you because you bled on a mountain road for a stranger, and because you told me an ugly truth about a man you loved instead of a comfortable lie, and because you looked genuinely terrified when I got shot instead of just angry that your plan failed. That's not a mafia boss. That's just a man. I'll take the man. Min-jae exhaled like he'd been holding that particular breath for 3 years. Since an airport terminal, since 4 seconds that had cost him an empire's worth of resources, and, apparently, his entire carefully guarded heart. For the record, he said, pulling her into him, I would have opened the gates on day 1 if you'd asked. Liar, Amara said, laughing into his shoulder. You absolutely would not have. No, he admitted, but it sounded good. Somewhere below the mountain, Seoul kept glittering the way it always had. 2 faces, one bright and one hidden. Both of them, for the first time and longer than Min-jae could remember, finally telling the truth about what they protected. If you believe real love is chosen freely, never forced or caged, hit subscribe, because Amara just proved a locked gate means nothing next to a heart that finally opens on its own. Like this, if you're glad the villain earned his redemption, instead of being handed one.